Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, good morning. I'm sitting here chuckling. I'm with our special guest this morning, and we were trying to do something before we went live, but no worries. We've been off the shelf for 12 years and know how to just keep it moving. So we want to welcome you here to Off the Shelf on this August 13th. I tell you, time gets by so quickly. We're already in the middle of August, and I can feel and see outside my window loads of trees outside of my home where some of the leaves are already starting to change colors. So I encourage you, not only if you're somebody who has a heart for story and you want to write a story and you listen to the off-the-shelf guest and you wish you were in their shoes, don't wait. You can always sit down and start on a story or whatever it is you want to do today. So I encourage you not to talk yourself out of it. And another thought that I want to leave with you as we kick off this special off-the-shelf show, this thought I also want to leave with you. Infuse your life with action. Don't wait for it to happen. And I hadn't even read that when I made my earlier statement, but infuse your life with action. Don't wait for it to happen. Make it happen. Make your own future. Make your own hope. Make your own love. And whatever your beliefs, honor your Creator, not by passively waiting for grace to come down from upon high, but by doing what you can to make grace happen yourself right now, right down here on earth. And that is by Bradley Whitford. So don't wait for it to happen. We always waiting for somebody else to do something or for something to just, like a magic wand waved and something that we wanted just suddenly appeared. Go out and make it happen. And our guest today did that herself, which is why she's on this show. If she hadn't taken those steps, she wouldn't have a book. Before we introduce her, I also want to encourage you to pick up a copy of my new book, Love Pour Over Me, and I want to thank those who have already done so. And I hope you'll share with me how you enjoy Love Pour Over Me. You can get it in print and ebook format. You can also read free excerpts of Love Pour Over Me at my website, which is chistel.com, CHISTELL.com. And I want to pause and thank those who have been with us for 12 years. I want to thank our loyal listeners again and our new listeners. And so now let us go and meet our very special off-the-shelf guest. And today's guest we've had some phenomenal guests on Off the Shelf. Today's guest is Paula Scott Bicknell, and she joins a long list of authors, some who have been on the New York Times bestseller list. Some of our authors regularly come on television shows weekly. Some have started their own. I know two who have their own television shows. So she joins a long list of awesome off-the-shelf guests. And again, it's Paula Scott Bicknell, and Paula is a Christian. She is a wife, a mother of 7 children. And when you go to her website, I'm going to give it to you in just a few seconds, and you look at her, you might have trouble figuring out which one is her and which one is her daughter. She just looks fabulous. She's a mother of 7 children, and if this was in the 1970s, we'd be saying something like how things are relative. We'd be saying she only has 7 kids because people had a whole lot of kids back then. But in today's times, fast forward, we say 7 kids. But years ago, it would have been you only have 7. And she's also a lover of the great outdoors. You will fall in love with her website. And she's the author of the book, Until the Day Breaks. I encourage you to gift yourself, to treat yourself, to hop over and check out Paula's website. And it is P as in Peter, S as in Sam, B as in boy, ICKNELL.com. Again, that's PSBICKNELL.com. She should run a contest and say, can you guess which one is me and which one is my daughter? And see how many people get it right. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Paula.
Oh, thank you, Denise.
We're so happy to have you here with us on Off the Shelf this morning, and it is just a pleasure to have you here. I enjoyed researching for your interview, and I really enjoyed visiting your website. Your personality and your essence comes through your website. So before we launch into today's show's questions, this is a question I have asked all of our guests. I'd like to give our listeners a little backstory on our guests so they can feel like they know our guests a little bit before we launch more of the questions. So can you tell off-the-shelf listeners where you grew up, Paula, and what life was like for you growing up?
Well, Denise, very blessed to grow up in the Sutter Buttes. They're known as the smallest mountain range in the world. I'm not quite sure if they are, but they're in northern California. They're about an hour or so above Sacramento. And it's really a little farming community. I lived in the Buttes. My parents farmed. We call them almonds. A lot of people call them almonds, but farmers who farm them call them almonds. And my grandparents were peach farmers. I am a fifth-generation California farmer, and my great-great-grandmother came over on a covered wagon to California, and she married a farmer. And so we've been farming ever since, and it's right now. Our farm is right at the edge of them, and I was very fortunate to grow up here, very small town type of place.
How many people where you grew up? And then it might tie into my next question, but how many people in the town where you grew up? The closest town to where I grew up was about 20 minutes away, and there was little towns in different directions. So, like the largest town in my area is a larger town. It's a half an hour from where I grew up, and I'm not sure what the population is now. It has 2 high schools now, and they're pretty big high schools, so it's not a small town by any means, but it still feels like a small town. You run into the same people, in the stores and that sort of thing. But the actual town I can consider my town is probably the little town of Sutter, and it's down the road, and it's very small. It has one little tiny grocery store and a high school and a few churches. It's a little rural town, and I guess that would be my town. Okay. Paula, what did you dream of becoming when you were a kid? What did you dream about of becoming?
Denise, I wanted to be a writer from a very early age. I think part of it was probably I grew up where I lived, the closest neighbor was a ways. He was a farmer. There was no girls. My brother had a friend who actually drove his dad's old Jeep. He was probably 10 or 12, and he would drive up our hill and visit. And so I had a big imagination, maybe because I had to make my own friends. I'm not real sure. So I was pretty young when I decided I wanted to be a writer. It was 10 years old maybe or earlier. Before that, I was always on my pony and dreamed of being an Indian. So I really liked, living in the country. I would tie my pony up on the front porch and go in the house, get a snack, go back out, get on my pony, and ride some more. So it was a neat way to grow up.
One thing I do appreciate about doing off the shelf and different, as a freelance writer, different people I've written for women's magazines, people who have landed historical business deals, and I love hearing people's backstories because there is such a breadth. Our lives are so rich, and I don't think we notice it until you get out and you start talking to and meeting more people, and you just become amazed with people alone. It's just such a gift, just each person. And your story is, I've heard so many people who have come on off the shelf, their story's different. He and his mother had to flee another country. Some have grown up and traveled the world and then come back to the United States or continue to live in another country. But the stories are so rich, some from small towns like you are, and some from large towns that they've seen evolve over the years. But I love your website, and when you're talking to our listeners about your background, you're from a farming background, you will notice that as soon as you go to Paula's website, to our listeners, and her website, again, for those who are just tuning in off the shelf, is P.S. Bicknell, P.S. S as in Sam, BICKNELL.com. And like I was saying, I love your website. It has such a very powerful personal touch. You feel as if you're with a friend while you're at your website. So that said, that's something, that authenticity, that it's hard to create that. You really have to be genuine about it. Who created your website, Paula, and was it your intent to give visitors the feeling you wanted them to feel like they were hanging out with a friend while they were at your website?
You know, Denise, my website was kind of an accident, I guess. When I started it, my literary agent at the time said I had to have a website, and he said I had to blog. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what a blog was. I was knee-deep in raising my little ones, and I thought, I have no time to blog. I have no time for a website. I barely have time to write on my novels. I don't know how to do that. And I just really prayed about it, and I just said, you know, God, this is your thing. I'm going to do this for you. I started out, I just called it Lessons on Loving God, and started just telling kind of the lessons that God was teaching me. I just thought I would just share with my friends. I think of my readers as my friends. I started out, they were my friends. My first readers were family and friends. And so, you know, just really writing for people I love and for the God I love. And my website, honestly, my husband put together, and it needs so much work. But we farm. We've been in the middle of harvest this summer. We tried to add to the website so we could add my book, and took just on a basic website to put my book on there, and have not had time to work on it. But I try every week to blog, and I'm behind this week. I was hoping to get a blog posted before today, and I wasn't able to do that because our peaches and pluots we're just finishing up. We have another week or two of harvest, and we work really hard. We work 6 days a week. We take Sundays off. That's our day to go worship our Lord and be a family and have a family dinner with my parents and our kids. And so I'm glad you like the website, Denise. I feel like it needs a lot of work, but I just try, you know, I just decided from day one, I'm just going to be honest in my walk with the Lord. And you know, we all kind of wrestle and struggle and have joy and sorrow and all those things. And I just wanted to be real about that.
Where did you get the idea for your first story, A Puppy Without a Tail?
Oh, too funny. I can't believe you. Yeah. And, you know, I'm not sure where that came from. I love puppies. You can ask my cousins. I always wanted to play puppies when I was really little, and it just drove them crazy. And I think, again, the puppies were my friends, the dogs. We lived on a little farm, and I had lots of animals, and I always had my dog with me and loved puppies. And I think it came from, I always feel like I was missing something. You know, like, I think when you are created by the Lord, you just to have that place in your heart for Him, and when it's not quite filled yet, you just feel like you're missing something. And also, you know, when you go to school, you just kind of, you don't always fit in at school. I went from a really tiny little country school to a bigger school, which was small. People would probably laugh, but my parents, when they moved to Sutter Buttes, I was moved to a bigger school, and I just felt out of place. And I had worked on The Puppy Without a Tail, and I finished it. I think I was 4th or 5th grade when I finished that story, and I drew all the pictures for it. And of course, my parents were so proud. They really nurtured that in me, the storytelling.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Now, did you go back, and we only have a few more questions before we get into Until the Day Breaks. Did you go back and finish your bachelor's degree? As I was researching, I said, oh, my gosh, I couldn't believe that you stopped two classes shy of graduating. Did you?
You know, Denise, I never did. My husband was in the military. He was a Army helicopter pilot, and we moved around a lot. And he at Davis, which UC Davis is a wonderful university, and I went and signed up to finish my degree, my English degree. I was 2 classes short. Of course, I would have had to take, probably a year or 2 at UC Davis to meet their requirements. And I signed up for my classes, and I found myself pregnant. And I was thrilled because I wanted more kids. My husband at the time, he hadn't become a born-again Christian yet, and I had. And so he was a little by that. But I ended up pregnant, and then I ended up 5 months in bed. I had a really rough pregnancy, and so I never finished my degree. I let it go. I had four boys in 8 years, and the youngest of those boys now is 5 years old, so ended up with 7 kids, and I just had my hands full, and so I didn't. Yeah, that is probably one of my regrets in life. I wish I'd have just done those 2 classes when I, first got married and my husband and I would have had to spend a semester apart, which would have been really hard because he got sent to Alabama, and that's why I left school. I wanted to be with him. We were newly married, but so no degree.
You can always go back and finish it. You were that close, which is a good thing. I had 2 other questions I wanted to ask you. Did you? And you are the things you do to our off-the-shelf listeners are probably like, oh my gosh, you are probably maybe opening up a world to a lot of our listeners that they only see you on television. Did you really raise pigs in school?
Oh, I did. I loved my pigs. I did. I had pigs for 4-H and FFA, which is Future Farmers of America, and I loved my pigs. Pigs are very smart. They're a lot like dogs, which makes it really hard to part with them at the fair. At the fair, you have to sell them for market, and, of course, somebody's going to eat them. That was really rough on my heart. And it's funny, I had picked pigs over sheep and other animals because I thought I would love them less, but they're a neat animal, and so yes, I did.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so one more question before we talk about Until the Day Breaks, and I sort of alluded to this when I was introducing you. Your husband, and I got to tell you, especially you look like you're in your 30s. Now you have 7 children, and you more so, to me, look like you're in your 20s. Both you and your husband, I wouldn't say, if I had to guess your ages, you don't really look them. You look like you're in your 20s. Somebody hears you have 7 kids. Even if you started having kids when you were 12, they could figure that you'd have to even still you wouldn't be in your 20s probably. Do you think that living out in nature, do you think it helps to keep a person looking young? I had to ask you that. Is that your secret? You look like you're in your 20s. Seriously, what do you think that's where it comes from? Just working outdoors a lot.
Denise, tonight is my 30-year class reunion. I'm 48 years old, and I'm going to my 30-year class reunion tonight. I'm nervous about it. A lot of these people I haven't seen in years, decades. I do think life in the country has something to do with it. It's hard work, but we have our own garden. We have our own chickens. We farm our own meat. A lot of our food is pretty natural food. We have farmers markets, so I'll trade my fruit for vegetables at the markets. I only grow tomatoes these days because my biggest thing with my garden is we have rattlesnakes and black widows, and I fight them to get my vegetables out of the garden. So my garden is half the size it used to be. But, I think one of the biggest things, Denise, is that I ask the Lord to renew my strength and youth often to keep up with my kids. I think having little ones, even though it's exhausting, really makes a difference. And chasing my little boys around, I have to be fast enough to catch them when they run off. And so I'm always asking the Lord, please, Lord, give me strength to be a mom, farmer, to take care of our farm, take care of our large family.
Okay, and maybe that's one of an additional benefit you're getting. You look like you're in your 20s. You look like you're in your 20s. Now, is Until the Day Breaks? I love that title. Is this your first published novel? And if not, can you tell us what the title of your first published novel is?
It is my first novel, Denise. I've written short stories for Chicken Soup for the Soul, Guidepost, that sort of thing. But this is my first novel, and I actually wrote it in my 20s, and I at the time I was not a born again Christian when I wrote it. I was a pretty strong Catholic and went to Mass often and loved my religion, and I wrote it because I had a best friend, very strong born again Christian, and I always had her Bible, and I admired her very much. So when I actually wrote the first draft of the novel, my Rachel was very much like my best friend Christy, who was a really strong Christian in my life. And then I kind of modeled, Roman, the hero, after my husband. And once I finished the draft, we were in Germany. My husband was stationed in Germany. So then when we moved back to the States, I submitted it to the second. A really good rejection on it. I had a publishing house read the whole thing and really liked the story. But I didn't realize at the time it wasn't working with anybody. I really didn't know much, and I didn't realize you were supposed to fix stuff and resubmit it. So I never resubmitted it. I just wrote another book. But it is my first published novel. I waited a long time to publish it. I rewrote it when I became born again, and
Okay. Now, what inspires you? We know where the Roman character is based loosely or however much off your husband, and the Rachel is based off of a friend that you had. What inspired you, though, to actually sit down and write? You said you started on it in your 20s. What inspired you to actually sit down and write Until the Day Breaks?
I really wanted to be a novelist. When I left college, I was just set on being a novelist. At the time, I was an avid reader of historical romances, and I wanted to do that. And my grandma was an avid reader of historical romances, my grandma Helen, and she had just really put it into my head that that's what I was going to do. And she was a major storyteller. She told all kinds of stories. She had sold her horse in Montana and bought a train ticket to California when she was 17, and came down here in a gold mine, and they got married. And so she always said, you're going to write these books that these women write. And so I took a shot, and I wrote my first book was Follow the West Wind. It never got published. It was considered by Harlequin. I was 21 at the time, and then they didn't take it. And so then I wrote Until the Day Breaks, and I wrote Until the Day Breaks in Germany. I started it because I was really homesick for California. I really missed the farm. We lived on like the fourth floor of a cinder block building from World War II. It was a very different life than I had grown up with, and so I started researching history avidly because I missed California. I just missed my home, and my California is so different than how most people perceive California, of course, because I come from a small farming community in Northern California. I'm hours from the ocean and probably 8 or 9 hours from Hollywood. I mean, it's very different than what the news portrays California as, and so that's really what started Until the Day Breaks. And then when I became a born-again Christian, I really wanted to write a love story, not just between a man and a woman, but that love story of how God goes after somebody. In the book, God is after Roman's heart, and God is pursuing Roman. And I really wanted to write that love story. Until the Day Breaks is a scripture from Song of Songs in the Bible. And I read that Song of Songs numerous times to write my book. I really wanted to portray love, just that really passionate love that the Lord has for us. And even when we're dirty sinners, even when we don't know him and we're sinning, the Lord loves us and goes after us. And I really wanted to put that in my story, and I hope it comes across.
Can you give off-the-shelf listeners a brief synopsis of Until the Day Breaks?
Yeah, so while researching, I found out that the Californios were a very unique culture in California. It didn't last very long. So Spain had settled California, and really the Catholic Church they had missions all along the coast in California, and then Mexico took over Spain. And so at the time my book is set in 1846, Mexico actually owned California. But there was a group of people called the gente de razón. They were the educated people. They were the people that really ran California, really governed California, and they were the Californianos. They were of mixed Spanish, some Indian heritage. They prided themselves on their Spanish blood. So the more Spanish blood they had in them, it was almost, like royalty. And they were ranchers. They had vast herds of cattle and lived on their horses, and it was a very unique culture. And it reminded me a little bit of how I'd grown up. My dad had a cattle herd. My grandparents and my uncle had cattle. I was a little tiny girl on my pony herding cattle. And so it reminded me a little bit of my upbringing, and I loved the culture. And I love the rising of California, how it did become a state. And so I wanted to write about that, and out of that, my story was born. And Rachel was the name Rachel was the first American woman to come to California by ship. Rachel Larkin, she married Thomas Larkin, and that's why I named my character Rachel, because she was I have her as an American woman coming to California. And
where was she from? Where did she come from?
She was from the East Coast. I had her from the Boston area, kind of the outskirts of Boston. And in that day, there was quite a few Americans, they called them Yankees, that came to California and wanted to own land. And to do that, they had to become Catholic. They had to join the Catholic Church to own land in California. And the Californianos betrothed their children. They arranged their children's marriages in California at the time, which I found so interesting. And so I thought, well, what would it be like?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Denise.
No, you said you thought, what would it be like?
To put an American girl with a Californiano, a Spanish soldier who didn't want her, who did not want to be married to her, and when they were betrothed, it was like marriage. The only thing really they weren't supposed to do is, they weren't supposed to have the marriage bed yet until they had the wedding. But since with the government, they were considered married. It was just a very interesting culture to me, and I thought, gosh, that could create a lot of conflict in a relationship.
So your story is historical, and there are people who love historical novels. We had a guest on here, and I think his stories were set in Texas. And he said, you cannot, he said, there are people, he said, I'm telling you, if they had something on a menu well, depending on when you set your story, you could say they had something on a menu in a restaurant or something. He said, if there are people, he said, I'm telling you, Denise, who actually know whether that food was actually on a menu back then or not, and they will call you out on it. He said it's just amazing. He said when you write historical novels, you would be shocked how many people really know. They're like, nah, that wasn't going on then.
They do really know.
Yes. Now, why did you set, oh, my goodness, you have really given us an education here. Why did you set the story in 1846?
That's when the Bear Flag Revolt happened. And the Bear Flag Revolt was when a group of men, Americans, took over Sonoma, which at the time was, one of the settled parts of California. They, manifest destiny was going on at that time. America was sweeping across the United States, taking land, and did not want to stop until they reached the Pacific Ocean. That was really what was happening at the time. And so there was this movement to take California from Mexico. And the Sacramento Valley that's where the wagon train started coming into in about the 1840s. And American families were settling the Sacramento Valley and pushing out the Indians. And the Californianos had really only settled mostly along the coast. They were not inland. They stayed along the coast, but they did not want the Americans, of course, taking over their state, which it wasn't a state at the time. It was a province of Mexico. But so you had the Americans fighting with the Californianos and Mexico, of course, but Mexico was far away and to take California. And so you had the Bear Flag Revolt, which was really what started the United States taking California from Mexico. And so that's why I chose 1846. I wanted to start the series when that started, and then I want to end the series after California becomes a state. So I love history. And I read lots of history books, and I love my state. I love California, and people don't know how it came to be. I'm amazed at how many Californians don't know their state history. So
yeah, that's probably any state. And so we make these arguments, and we make these arguments, and we don't even know. We don't have enough information to understand both sides of an argument, and yet we are so adamant, but we don't have enough information to hold an intelligent debate.
Right.
I really appreciate this about you. Until the Day Breaks, I have got to tell you, and the work that you put in just anybody listening to you right now knows you put in the work as far as research, and I really appreciate that. Not only can you be entertained while reading Until the Day Breaks, but you can walk away educated. So I'm going to ask you next, Paula, what's her relationship like with her father?
It's not good, Denise, and I wanted to portray this in the book too. She's really been abandoned by her father when she was a baby. Her mother dies and her father abandons her. He leaves her with the grandparents, and he goes to California really to make his fortune. And so she is a little girl that's, been abandoned by him, and they've really had no relationship until he's in California and he realizes that she's a commodity to him, that she would be valuable to bring her out and to betroth her to a Californian, because he's really trying to make higher. He's really trying to get more land. And he realizes if she's young and healthy and beautiful, that he can put her into a marriage and acquire land that way. And so he sends her ready to marry a minister in the Boston area, a young, passionate minister who loves the Lord and loves her. And so her father crashes into her life and really destroys the life she knows. But Rachel loves the Lord, and she's a strong Christian, and she knows she must obey her father, and she wants to be loved by her father, and she wants him to love her. She's in a lot of ways, she's seeking his approval. I think we often do that. We love our parents and we seek their approval and we try to earn it. And that's kind of where she is. And when she gets to California, she realizes her father really isn't interested in a relationship with her. He wants to use her to acquire more land. And so that, is really hard on her heart.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Is he... Oh my gosh, he does seem. If anyone reading any excerpts from Until the Day Breaks, he seems like he's totally. And I know back then, because I know my grandparents and that's not going back to the 1846. But
Right.
they said, children were to be seen and not heard, and you didn't.
Right.
You just did what you were told to do, and that was the end of the story. He seemed very, almost like, and maybe that was the way it was back then. Your children don't have feelings. They don't have thoughts. Who cares what they think? Who cares what they're feeling? This is what I told you to do, so go do it. He does come across that way, which makes me wonder why even would she stay. She seems more like a somewhat of a risk taker or an adventurer to me. And then I also wanted to ask you, is Until the Day Breaks, is it a sequel? And if so, why did you decide to start it with a sequel? But it's not you said this is the first, plan on making it a sequel, correct?
Right,
you plan on
correct.
Making
it's the first.
Okay.
It's the first in a series of 3 books. The second book I hope to have out there by December. I'm well into writing it, and that is it's titled The Far Side of the Sea, and it's set mostly in San Francisco in 1849. That is when San Francisco really became a city. It was a little village for years. It was Yerba Buena, and then when the Americans took over California, it became San Francisco, and then of course with the gold rush it exploded. It just boomed and grew very fast, and so I have my second book set in that time frame, and it's Roman's little sister Maria, who is the main character of that book. And then the third book will be Chasing the Wind, and it is set in the early 1850s when California really was born out of the gold rush. And so many things that was built on at that time were things that really didn't last. The riches of gold, that played out eventually, and you had a lot of transient type of lives at that time in California, and I wanted to portray that. I didn't feel like I could do the California Rising. It's called the California Rising series, and I didn't feel like I could put all that history in one book. It didn't feel like I could do it, and so at the time, my literary agent said make it a series, which I thought was a great idea. Les Stobie was my literary agent at the time, and he actually named the series the California Rising series. But I haven't written the last book yet, and I'm close to being finished with the second one. So.
Okay. Does Rachel have any brothers or sisters? Is she an only child?
She's an only child. Yeah, she's an only child, and
can you describe Rachel for us? Tell us the type of a woman. And I also wanted to ask you, we're 1846, so we know women, like children, you did what you were told. You didn't have much of an opinion. Is she a follower? Does she give in to other people's orders, especially when you consider her relationship with her father and what he wants her to do? Or is she bold? Does she speak up for herself?
Rachel is an interesting character to me. She's a lot, like I said, my best friend Christy. I also, when I rewrote the book for Christian readers, when I became a born-again Christian, Rachel took on a lot of characteristics of our oldest daughter, Tammy. And I actually kind of modeled some of her looks after our second daughter, Lacey. But Rachel appears to be very submissive. She seems to be very obedient. But underneath, she's stubborn. Underneath, she's a fighter. But it's been so buried in obeying God, and I believe that obeying God's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But I think in those days, women were really taught to be submissive, and we should submit to God. Even today, we should submit to God and obey our husbands. The Bible says to obey our husbands, and that to me has been a bit of a struggle. I'll just be really honest with you. My mom's very strong-willed, and I grew up, I remember the 70s when there was a real rise, and maybe, I'm sure even probably in the 60s, but I was born in the late 60s. So a real rise in women's asserting themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I really wanted to portray a woman who was fighting that she knew she needed to submit. She knew she needed to obey, and yet inside she really struggled with that. And I think because that has been one of my struggles as a wife and a mother, to submit and obey my husband. That's just hard. It didn't come naturally to me.
Mhm. Now, why didn't he come to California with Rachel? This is something that I wondered when I was reading and doing the research for the interview. Why didn't he come to California with her, considering that the reason she went to California, forget what came of it, but for the reader, she went there to go to attend her father's wedding. So I'm thinking, why didn't Stephen go? Why didn't he accompany her?
Well, his mother was dying. In the book, his mother was dying, and he was very, very much, I don't want to say a mama's boy, but Stephen is my Christ-like figure in the book, and he was taking care of his mother book, and so he couldn't leave with Rachel. And, of course, Rachel thought she was going for the wedding and to meet her father and all that. She had no idea her father was going to betroth California, trying to get land. So she really didn't know what was going on, and so Stephen did not know what was going on. Yeah. A little bit longer, I'll take care of her until she dies, and then I'll be free to pursue my bride, to marry my bride. And so kind of they really didn't have, enough information. Neither Stephen or Rachel really knew what was going on in the beginning of the story. And so the choices they made were out of a lack of knowledge, I guess.
Now, how alike and how different are Roman and Stephen? Oh, and then before you answer that, how long have Stephen and Rachel been together before she went to California?
In my thought process, a couple of years, and Stephen has taken over and become the pastor of her grandfather's church. So in the book, Rachel's grandfather was the minister of the church, and then when he retired, Stephen took over. And so Stephen's, a number of years older than Rachel. He's still a young man, but and he's just he's spiritually quite a bit more advanced than Rachel in his walk with the Lord. He really knows that his ministry and being a pastor is really what the Lord has for him. So he really wants to marry Rachel. He really wants her to be his wife, but his struggle inside is knowing that that's not God's plan for him. At the back of his mind, he kind of knows marriage isn't going to be for him. Paul said in the Bible, Paul said, it's better not to marry, but if you need to marry, for temptation, if you listen to that. And Stephen has embraced that he is a man of God, and his life here really is about spreading the gospel. And he's not sure if God has Rachel to be his wife or not. So he's wrestling with that all along.
So how alike and different are Roman and Stephen? You got a lot of twists in this story. How alike and different are Roman and Stephen? How would you say they're similar, and how would you say they're different? I would imagine their religious beliefs are different, but how are their personalities similar or different?
Well, the interesting thing is they seem very different. At first glance, you think, they're very different men. But really, when you really get right down to it, they are similar in a lot of ways. Both of them are protectors. They protect their loved ones, and they protect people, even those they don't love. They protect. And Stephen has walked far enough with the Lord that he loves. He is a man who loves, where Roman isn't even close to that yet. But they are men that take care of the weak. They are men that protect their women. They have good hearts, and it's just Roman hasn't really met the living God yet. He's very Catholic in his beliefs, but he is mad at God. He is angry at God for his mother dying, and just he's fighting so hard to keep California, to not have the Americans take over California. Where Stephen's real push is heaven. The kingdom of God is what Stephen is really pursuing, where Roman is really pursuing the kingdom of California, its own country governed by the gente de razón, which were the upper class at that time, the Spanish-blooded people who really their roots were from the conquistadors, the conquerors, is where these people came from. And their mentality, I guess, was you conquered the land for God and for country, is really Roman's roots. Where Stephen's roots are much more rooted in the Bible, and when I say the Bible, in the biblical teaching that we are really after the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of this world.
I tell you, you're this Until the Day Breaks, the 3-book series. It could be a movie or television show. You have done your homework. You have a phenomenal story that you're developing, and the first book already done. Can you remind us again, what happened to Rachel's mother? Did she pass away, or did she just abandon? You said her father abandoned her and left her with her grandparents, right, to raise her. What happened to her mother again?
Her mother died when she was a baby.
Oh,
so
okay.
Her mother passed away when she was just a little toddler, and she was left with the grandparents to be raised by the grandparents.
So she and Roman's history there is similar. Let me ask you this.
The loss of a mother.
Yes. Let me ask you this. When you say, I'm listening to you during the interview, and this is how a book becomes more interesting and engaging for somebody who hasn't read it yet. You've tied a lot of things together. Did you set out to do that? Did you set out knowing Roman's upset with our Creator because his mother's not here, and Rachel doesn't, her mother, and then she's with her father. I don't know how dominant Roman's father is in his life, but some of these links and these conflicts that you have, did you set out to create those when you were developing the story? This would be helpful for our listeners who want to create a novel, who are creating one. Did you set out to do that, like mapping that out, or did that sort of evolve on its own as you wrote the story?
It really evolved on its own. I'm what they call in the writing industry a seat of your pants writer, meaning the story, to me, it's like plays like a movie in my head, and I type it. So my first draft is so fun. I love the first draft because I don't quite know what's going to happen. I may have an idea, but what's happening is it's something that it's like I'm following a film, and I'm typing, and on the days when I'm just really in the flow, I'm just a typist, and I'm typing as fast as I can to get the story down that they call it following your muse. I always pray that I'm following the Holy Spirit, but it's something that's outside of me. And then of course when I edit the book, then I really think about tying stuff together. But that first draft, when the story is coming out, I'm finding out that Roman is hurt because his mother died, because he's prayed really hard and God did not answer his prayers to keep his mother alive. I'm finding out what my characters are finding out, and so it's so fun to do the first draft.
Wow, I'm listening to you. You've got enough conflict to make your story so exciting, and I didn't know if you planned it that way, but you're saying that happened organically. Now,
right.
Does Joshua prefer? He seems almost dismissive when he sees Rachel praying in her room at the start of the story. Does he have issues with God? Does he like don't talk about God?
Yeah, he is the son of a pastor. He would be a pastor, and he is a son who has rejected the faith of his parents and rejected it in the sense of, I'm smarter than this. I don't need God. I'm a man who makes my own fate. He's really rejected what he grew up with, and I know a few people like that who were raised by godly parents, and they just decided that faith wasn't for them, and they're self-made men. They're proud and they're strong, and they don't need God, and which I find very sad.
Yeah.
So that's how I modeled Joshua.
Well, the second book in the series, will that be set in California as well, or will some parts of that story take place in other areas?
The second book takes place, it actually starts at the end of the first book. So at the very end of Until the Day Breaks is part of the first chapter of Far Side of the Sea with Maria. And she ends up on a ship, and so she actually goes to Boston, and then she comes back to California, and then the rest of the novel plays out in San Francisco in 1849, 1850. 1850 was when California did become a state, and so I wanted to get some of that history in there. And so the second, and then the third book, so far I haven't written the third book, so there could be some twists and turns I don't know about. I'm hoping that Muse will come that I just follow in Marysville, Sutter Buttes area, which is my area, because Marysville was a town that really boomed. It was the entrance to the gold fields. So it was this wild city, where you gambled and had houses of prostitution and all these things for men, because at the time it was mostly men that were in California seeking gold. And so that's the third.
Oh my gosh, you really know your stuff, especially about California. Oh my goodness. How long did it take you to write until the day breaks? And can you let our listeners know, because we have people who listen to Off the Shelf who themselves want to be writers or want to improve their stories, as well as readers, but how long did it take you to write until the day breaks? And you said you don't have a process you use to develop characters. You just sit down and start writing?
Yes, I do, and I think I probably need to rethink that. But that has been my process. Until the Day Breaks is interesting because, I rewrote that book several times. And so the thing with Until the Day Breaks is it has, violence and sexual tension, and I really wanted to portray history authentically. I really wanted to portray human nature authentically. We really are sinners in need of a Savior. And so that book I wrote on for years. Here and there I would work on it. I can't remember how long the first draft took, but the book I'm working on now, Far Side of the Sea, I started in May, and I hope to have it to my editor in October. I have a historical editor. She's wonderful. Jenny with Historical Editorial helps me with the history and just the editing, and I hope to have it done by October. So I guess my point is I started the book at the end of around May into May, and I hope to have it to my editor by October. So, in the middle of harvest, it's really hard.
I got to tell you, and another question I want to ask you, we're down to about only 5 minutes left, and I had other questions I wanted to ask you, but I can see I won't get to them. But how do you find the time? So many people say, not only book writing, but for our listeners who there's something else they want to do, and it might be something that's been on their heart for years, but we use this excuse often. I just don't have the time. You're a busy woman. You have 7 kids. You're married. You work a farm, and farm working is probably about as tough as it gets. How do you find the time to sit down and write?
Well, it's funny, Denise, because I believe that we all find the time to do what we love to do. So I think if we most of us will do what we love to do. And so I do love to write. I love writing, and I've had to cut out a lot of other things to write. Like I have a horse that I love, and I would love to be riding her, and I haven't ridden her since before May. And my mom has been great. My mom works a farm with us, and so in the morning she packs our fruit and she lets me write. So I spend a couple hours in the morning writing before I go over to our packing shed and then load up and deliver our fruit, or go to my farmer's market where I sell fruit. So it's helped to have, my husband's very supportive too. So at night, after we're done with dinner, I'll sit down and write for a while before bedtime. And I don't watch television. Years ago, we decided not to do television. We live in the country, and our kids can watch a movie. You can put on a movie, but I haven't watched a movie in a year probably. So at night, when all my kids are settled down and my family's fed and taken care of, I either write or I research or read. So I've had to cut out other things to be a writer.
You know, I got to tell you, you are really fascinating me. I want to give out her website again. Now you can see no television, and there was a couple who wrote books. They sold their house. They had a beautiful home, and the wife told me that just thinking about the mortgage kept me up at night. She said they sold their home, and they lived out of an RV, and she said totally debt-free, and just the way they lived their lives, it just people, like you say, you figure out how to do it, and they, you know, you just don't watch television. There are people who told me I cut it out of my life, and their life is better. But if you go to Paula's website again, it's PSBicknell.com. I'm telling you, you won't be able to tell which one she is. And then you hear her tell you they most of their food they grow on their land themselves. We're always trying to find ways to be healthier, how much money we put in to health care, and the stories you hear on the news, people say they bring them down. And so maybe you try turning the TV off sometimes and see what it does for you. What have readers been saying about Until the Day Breaks? What have you been hearing from readers?
You know, what blesses me the most, Denise, is when I wrote the book, I wasn't thinking about writing it for Christians. You know, I just wrote a story that was on my heart, and when I sat down to really put it out there, I really wanted readers who may not really know the Lord well yet, who really want the things of God and want to know God but don't know Him yet. And so I have been very blessed that I've had a number of readers who aren't Christians, who don't go to church, have loved the story and just said it really touched my heart. And that has been my aim. I hope as my audience, I really want to write for people who was like me when I was 30, you know, and I hadn't been born again yet. I was so interested in God, but I didn't really know Him. And that is really who I want to write for. And I've been excited to have a number of people say, I just love your book, but they're not churchgoers. You know, and that's thrilling to me. Or and then of course I love it that there's Christians out there who've it too, and it's not, you know, it's I put a warning on my website. It's PG. It's not for everybody. It's not it. You know, I read the Bible every day. I love the Word of God, and you know, the Bible's very PG. There's lots of violence in the Bible, and lots of times, you know, I actually blush reading the Word of God, and so I really, you know, decided I just really wanted to write authentically. You know, I really wanted to write authentically, and so I hope I've done that. And people have often said it's very real or it's raw and honest, and that just thrills me because I'm after that. Or my favorite is, I couldn't put it down. I love that. I've had a number of readers say, I couldn't put the book down, and I was thrilled about that. And so it's been fun.
Oh, can you tell us, we are down to the wire. Can you tell us where off-the-shelf listeners can get copies of your book, Until the Day Breaks? And let us know where you are on social media, if you're on social media.
I am. So the book is on Amazon. You just put in Paula Scott, and it should pop up. And my website is psbicknell.com. So you can go to my website. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Pinterest. I'm on Instagram. I don't have a lot of time for social media, but I do my best to answer messages and respond. Site is there too. And so, I probably spend most of my social media on Facebook. And you can connect with me there. I would love to hear from you. I've totally enjoyed talking with you, Denise. It's been wonderful, and so thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. We have just been treated to a very special guest, Paula Scott Bicknell. She's the author of the book Until the Day Breaks. If you came in midstream or late to this interview, I encourage you, once it finishes streaming, to listen to it in the archives and in its entirety. She knows her stuff. She's the second historical novelist we've had on. The first one knew his stuff too, and they go way back. And you can listen to her interview and tell she really respects her craft. She knows her history. She didn't just throw a book together. And encourage you to follow along with Rachel and Roman and Stephen and Joshua and Maria, who appears more in the second book in the series. And the series it kicks off with Until the Day Breaks. Again, remember, Paula Scott, author of Until the Day Breaks, and she's on the internet, psbicknell.com. Go over to her website, and you're just going to fall in love with her website. So we thank her for being here with us, and we thank each of you. And as I always tell you, you are awesome. You are amazing. You are incredible. Go out and create a fabulous day for yourself. See you back here next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bye for now, and Paula, I'll shoot you an email.
Wonderful. Thank you, Denise. Bye-bye.